Good evening, black people and all allies fighting for black liberation, black prosperity, and black joy. I'm Charles Blow, and welcome to Prime. From the beginning of the Biden presidency, Vice President Kamala Harris has been leading the administration's immigration response. Under her leadership, the goal has been to work with Central American countries to solve the drivers of migration to the U.S. Harris released the root causes strategy to establish a fair, orderly, and humane immigration system in late July. A key component of it was to allot $310 million in urgent relief to address factors like extreme weather, corruption, violence, and poverty, all of which, by the way, are issues that have contributed to the migration of Haitians to the U.S. The root causes strategy was released as the U.S. faced a 20-year high in migrant detentions at the border, and nearly 190,000 apprehensions were recorded in June alone. Republicans have been on the attack, calling the administration weak on immigration. Activists are accusing Biden of failing to defend vulnerable foreigners, and Democrats are urging the administration to ease immigration policy. With incoming fire from all directions, Biden appears to be stepping to the forefront of immigration himself. So where does that leave Harris? Joining me now to discuss is board member of the Institute for Justice and Democracy in Haiti and human rights attorney, Brian Concordia. So, Brian, it looks like there's a mess on the border, particularly with the Haitian migrants on the border. The Biden administration is catching it from all sides, can't seem to please anyone on this. Should they even be attempting to please everyone, or should they just enact a policy that is fair and humane regardless of what people say?
I think they should start by obeying the law. These expulsions were declared illegal by a U.S. federal judge last week. They've long been recognized, including by Senator Harris, when she was a senator, as illegal, as a violation of the Refugee Convention of 1954. We're sending people seeking asylum back without giving them a hearing to a place where they're subject to more persecution. That's clearly illegal. That should be the starting point of their policy. But once you get beyond what's legal and then you're talking about who you're going to please, the Biden administration is trying to please a lot of people, including white supremacists. They're worried that there's a lot of hysteria being whipped up by Tucker Carlson, by FAIR, by Numbers USA, and other groups with white supremacist roots, and they're avoiding following the law in order to not inflame them. That's just not going to work. By ceding to white supremacists, you're only showing that the white supremacy works, and you're only encouraging more.
Do you believe this is the same mistake that the Obama White House made when they were deporting so many people out of the country during his administration? They called him deporter in chief among the the immigrant advocates. And that was because I believe that his strategy was, if I can show them that I'm not soft on immigration, then maybe they'll go along with comprehensive immigration reform. They never did that. Do you think that Biden's making the same mistake?
Yes, and the same mistake that George W. Bush made before him and Bill Clinton before him. These white supremacist voices have been hijacking our immigration policy for well over 25 years. And everybody keeps trying to appease them, and that doesn't work. And I think it's time to start obeying the law, to do what the majority of Americans want, which is common sense immigration reform.
Let me ask you a question about something that is said but not said. It's said in code when Republicans are talking about immigration. And it's basically this, that cruelty works. That if you are cruel at the border, it will deter people from coming. And the moment that you say that you are going to be humane at the border, it encourages people to show up and test your humanity. What do you say to that argument?
Yeah, this situation is a great rebuttal of that. Most of the people that are in Del Rio, Texas now, that are Haitians, they left Haiti 5-10 years ago. They've been trying to find a place where they can be safe and live a life of dignity. They didn't find it in South America, and they're up at the border living in these desperate circumstances because they have no other choices. And by responding to that situation with brutality, it clearly doesn't work in terms of solving the problem at the border, and it just causes more problems and more suffering for people who have suffered plenty enough. If we were serious about reducing pressure at our border, we would reduce our policies that are generating refugees. You mentioned Vice President Harris's root cause initiative, and if you look at that strategy, it talks a lot about what other countries can do. And with some of it with some generous U.S. support for that. But what it doesn't do is suggest that the U.S. look in the mirror. And Haiti, again, is a great example. The people that have fled Haiti over the last 10 years have been fleeing a undemocratic government that was placed there by the United States under the Obama administration and has continued to be supported under both President Trump and Biden. That's why they're leaving. If we want fewer Haitians at our borders, we need to stop making it so that Haitians can't live safely in Haiti. And this isn't the first time. The same thing happened. I mean, the first big exodus of Haitians to the U.S. was under Baby Doc Jean-Claude Duvalier, again supported by the U.S. Same thing happened in 1991 when we helped with the coup d'etat. Same thing happened in 2004 when we did another coup d'etat against President Aristide.
What do you think of the price tag on Vice President Harris's proposal? It seems like a drop in the bucket because it has to spread out over so many countries. The issues that they're trying to deal with are enormous. If you just take climate impacts alone, there's very little you can do over several countries with $300 million. So what do you think about the dollar amount on this?
I've worked on Haiti issues for 25 years, and time and again, you see announcements that are purportedly to help Haiti or countries like it, but the math doesn't add up, or the policy doesn't add up. I think a lot of these are policies that are announced to play to the American public, not to reality on the ground. And I think if you are going to make a meaningful difference, it needs to be calibrated to the reality on the ground, both in terms of the dollar amounts, but also in terms of what we are really doing to make sure that people can stay at their homes, which all of us want to do. I mean, Haitians would love to stay in Haiti's a wonderful place. Most Haitians would love to stay in Haiti if they can do so in reasonable safety and dignity.
Why won't the U.S. commit more funds to stopping or stemming the flow of migrants to our southern border? The governor of Texas, Greg Abbott, said yesterday it was going to take Texas $3 billion alone to kind of harden up the border and to deal with migrants at their border just in the state of Texas. If we know that the price tag, assuming his number is true, if the price tag is, incredibly large for us dealing with people once they get here, which is already too late, they're already at the border, why wouldn't we spend billions of dollars to stop them from getting here to the border so we wouldn't have to deal with them in that way?
Yeah, of course. And another good comparison is the defense budget, where we spend $740 billion, which clearly doesn't defend against some of the most important threats we face, including infectious disease, including if you think of the border as a threat, the response to that is not spending more on money or whips or fences. The response to that is investing money in ways that will allow people to live at their homes.
What was your initial reaction to seeing the images that I think horrified many people of officers on horseback using things that looked like whips? I'm told that they were not, to kind of herd human beings and to chase and threaten them. What was your initial reaction to that?
My initial reaction was horror and outrage, like most other people. My secondary reaction, though, was that being outraged at these photos is really low-hanging fruit from a moral perspective. those people were being whipped as part of a process of getting them into a system of illegal deportation where they're being sent back to Haiti, where they're subject to further persecution. And to be worried about the whips, but not about the the buses to the airport and the planes and the shackles and everything else, all the rest of this illegal and equally racist and even more destructive process is, I think, being a bit disingenuous. I think if we're serious about being outraged at racism in U.S. deportation process, we need to look at the whole process.
How dangerous do you think it is to repatriate some of these people to Haiti who haven't lived there in years, some of whom no longer even speak the language, do not have a place to live, one assumes, in Haiti because they've been gone for so long, no way to get to wherever they might have been, just being dropped off at an airport in a country that has been decimated by an earthquake and by flooding from a hurricane. How dangerous is it? How much are we putting these people's lives in danger by sending them back to Haiti?
It's pretty serious danger. The Haitian Bridge Alliance, which is doing great work at the border, especially in Del Rio, they followed some people who had been deported a few months ago, and they found life for those people was grim. Most were not eating anything close to what their minimum daily requirements were. A lot of people were living on the street, and this is in a country that is unraveling. Large parts of the capital are run by gangs. The government is unable to provide basic government services.
Brian Concannon, thank you so much for joining us tonight. We will continue to track this story.